Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I would like to welcome my guests today. With me is Catherine Fitzgerald, speaker, writer, certified coach, and founder of Brass Tacks with Heart Executive Coaching. She works with C-level leaders and their teams as they navigate the choppy waters of aligning people, performance, and profits. Stuart Wiggins is Chief Advisor at Induna Advisors, working to significantly increase company revenue by developing positive client reports and establishing solid business relationships. And Peter Winnick works with individuals and organizations to build and grow revenue streams through their thought leadership platforms and is host of the Leveraging Thought Leadership podcast. Thank you all for coming back. And usually get guests to come once, but if they keep coming back, that's really
Right.
And here is our scenario for today. The NAACP recently issued a travel advisory declaring that people should avoid travel to Florida, claiming that the state is openly hostile toward African Americans. The advisory comes in response to Governor Ron DeSantis's, quote, aggressive attempts to erase Black history and to restrict diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in Florida schools, unquote. National Review cited statistics showing that Florida ranks among the highest states in the nation for Black homeownership, Black employment, Black business ownership, and influx of new Black residents, not to mention the highest rated education system in the country. Moreover, 3 Black tourism organizations criticized the advisory as harmful to the economic well-being of the African American community. And some have pointed out as ironic that the NAACP's board of directors chairman, Leon W. Russell, lives in Tampa, that's Florida. The advisory appears to be a reaction to legislation denying AP credit for a course on African American studies and restricting funding for DEI programs on college campuses. Granted that the NAACP may have legitimate grievances, is a travel advisory an ethical response to the Florida legislation? Does travel in Florida really pose a clear and present danger to Black tourists? If not, is the advisory a legitimate form of protest? Or does it make a mockery of warnings against travel to legitimately dangerous destinations like Venezuela, Iran, and Syria, the same way branding feminists and Trump supporters as Nazis makes a mockery of the Holocaust? The floor is open.
Well, I would say if you look at it, there's a lot of layers here of the onion. If you say, well, what is the point of the travel advisory? Is there really a risk for African Americans to travel to Florida, right? And it sounds, I don't know the answer to that, but it sounds like from what you said, the answer to that is no. It's not that there's a higher risk for African Americans to come to Florida. So at face value, I think it's just not true. And if it's not true, well, what if there's an advisory for something else? And we have this with horrible smokescreen here in New York today. There's an advisory. I don't want people using a health advisory as a political statement, because then I'm going to ignore it. So I think at first blush, I would say it's probably not the right tactic, irregardless of what DeSantis' stands on. You could disagree with all that stuff and think it's horrible and awful, whatever. But, does the ends justify the means, I think, is really where that goes.
Like the political boy who cried wolf.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's a danger in that as well.
Great point, Peter. I really agree. You got to start at the beginning. And I think that's the foundational question.
Well, that there's really obviously an economic driver, right? Because if you get people to stop going and spending, I mean, I don't know if it's the number 1, 2, or 3 industry, it's certainly in the top 3 in Florida, tourism, get people to stop going and spending money, you're going to get their attention.
Right.
Let's be honest, the whole intent of this is to give it visibility in the media.
Sure.
I mean, these travel advisories don't work. A little bit of history. Missouri tried this in 2017, or the NAACP tried to do this in 2017. Relative to what happened to Michael Brown and some other things that happened in Missouri. And it really just fell on dead ears. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't get change. Change was initiated because it was then in the media. It gave it visibility. And because it gave it visibility, then the action created change through legislation. So what's really the intent of the NAACP? I mean, I would hope that they're sophisticated enough to realize that these types of boycotts don't really work on a large scale basis. And the population of African Americans in Florida is high enough, and their economic situation is a lot better than in a lot of states. So why impact negatively by telling people don't travel to Florida? So again, I think I'm going to call it bar talk. It's just an opportunity just to say something and hope that the media or some other organizations pick up on it. Just one final point. These types of things never work, because the key to making them work is get everybody to do it. You can't get 10 people to do everything together.
Well, I wonder, Stuart, and I don't know the answer to this, if that was one of several things that the NAACP came up with, right? If it was the only thing, I'd say that's the best you got, right? But if it was, here's the laundry list of things that we're going to do to get DeSantis's or Florida's attention because we don't agree with what he's doing on A, B, and C, maybe, because I agree with, I mean, has anybody ever checked if there's a travel advisory before going to Florida before? Other than
there's a lot of other reasons why you wouldn't want to go to Florida.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
It is
alligators
interesting
are on my number one.
It is interesting you mentioned Missouri, though, Stuart, because I live 6 miles from Ferguson, and one of my neighbors who owns a flower shop in a different neighborhood entirely had her window smashed during a protest parade. Parade may not be the right term, but there was actually some concern for public safety.
Sure.
And I don't even remember hearing about the travel advisory, frankly, not that I need to travel to be here, but will people listen at all? I mean, they don't even listen when they're told not to go to North Korea. So I'm not sure Florida's going to.
That's very true.
Catherine, any thoughts?
I'm thinking about the polarization of the stance they took. And it kind of feels like everything in our political arena right now, that you're either on this side or this side. And there's not, there is no belief in positive intent before as we listen to anyone. There is my way and my idea, or your way and your idea, and one is right and one is wrong. And I always feel like listening for understanding is my number one priority. And so when you see a travel advisory, and then the context of what this whole thing was about, it doesn't connect the dots to me. It sounds like they're jumping on a pedestal and pounding their gavel, and it rather than a heartfelt conversation. And maybe they feel unable to have that. Maybe our country has evolved to this place where unless it's on fire and unless we've attacked someone's financial pocketbook, they're not going to pay attention. Maybe that's it. But it's very saddening to me. I just look at it and I think, how can we come together?
I'd love to see you go out and find 10 people and ask them if they're even aware that there's a travel advisory issued by the NAACP. In fact, I would make it easier. Go find 10 African Americans and ask them if they're aware of it. So I'll let you cherry pick it that way. I mean, there's an ulterior motive to this. And, organizations, if they can get some free publicity through saying something provocative, and I'm going to call this provocative,
Sure.
then they're going to take advantage of it. They don't really seriously expect people to say, well, I'm going to knock Florida off my list.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to Disney World now because of it. Yeah, exactly.
I want to build on something that you said, Stuart, because I think there's also dilutes their credibility and integrity, because there's lots of things that I would listen to the NAACP about. There's lots of things I'd listen to the ADL about. There's lots of things I live to the Weather Channel about, right? But when you start going outside of your domain of expertise, I'm like, wait a minute, you know, do African Americans go to the NAACP website before booking travel? I think it's a ridiculous expectations. It's not a credible source for that source of information, right? So I think
Right.
once you start sort of, even if your intent is good, you start to question the validity or integrity or the facts or the, you know, whatever it is underneath it.
Well, it certainly, in my opinion, was not the best choice to get the word out on that.
Right.
And I think that does speak to the integrity of the organization and you know, the quality of the team that's handling their marketing and their lobbying and their, you know, positioning within the context of communication to the world or to the United States.
You know, Catherine, you mentioned that you know, presume positive intent, and I think that's something we should all practice. And in this case, I would like to believe that the NAACP felt that this was something they wanted to draw attention to, and this was a tactic, even though it wasn't really on point. But then the question, the issue that you have all raised is, are they ultimately discrediting themselves in their efforts to bring serious attention to what they feel is an important issue, in which case they're really not serving their own cause?
The question is, what does success look like? The five of us, we're on the board, or the four of us, we're on the board at the NAACP, and we're trying to make a decision we want to do this. At some point, we're going to say, okay, how do we define success if we do this?
Right.
You're
And I mean,
totally correct.
there's no measurables. There's no measurable. You know, if you look at what happened with Target, with LGBTQ, it's
Right.
measurable. They can tell you exactly what's happened to their sales. Agree or disagree, their sales took a negative impact. Or Bud Light, their sales took a negative impact. But I mean, like, you can't look at Florida 6 months from now and say, this travel advisory had this effect.
Great
Well, but
point, Stuart.
But if they were explicit and honest, though, if they were explicit and honest and said, to show our support against A, B, C, and D that DeSantis or whatever is doing, from the 1st of June to the 20th of June or whatever, we suggest you don't travel there. And then you can measure that time period and say, well, typically we'd have this many African Americans coming in, attendance at Disneyland is down, do the math and say, wow, that had $1 billion economic impact, you know.
How would you measure that, though? I mean, when you go to Disney World and you walk up to the gate, do they take some sort of demographic measurement so they could say who's coming through the gate at any given time? I don't know. I've never been to Disney World. But I mean, like,
Don't go now. You're not supposed. There's a travel advisory. Don't go. But I'm sure you can get. I'm sure you can get the data based on who's showing up. I'm sure you can get that data.
I'm sure you can too. I just don't know how easy it is. I'm not aware of, like, when I go places, if somebody's doing a demographic check. It's a good point though. You could probably find the data, but the question then becomes, is it worth it? Is it worth it?
Well, but that would be an experiment to say, hey, let's run this for 10 or 20 days, see if we got their attention. If the data says, hey, Disney, or hey, state of Florida, it's costing you this much in whatever tourist tax every week just in Orlando or something like that.
I would suggest to you that Disney is probably considered more favorable because of what a number of people feel as though the governor is coming at them too hard. So, you know, a lot of people are going to go to Disney and support them because they think they should, and not let a travel advisory. Now, of course, that's just hyperbole on my part because I don't have anything to. It's just my opinion, but still.
Go ahead.
But I was just going to say, Peter's point about putting measurable parameters into some action step is critical to being an effective lobbyist, being an effective communicator on behalf of an organization. And I think that given the hot topic, if you will, and the political ramifications, the financial ones, and et cetera, it would stand to reason that this would have been a topic that the board would have considered, I would think. And if this is the best solution that they came up with, I'm kind of disappointed.
I would think that as I look at the question, I think the way to really approach it was come up with a strategy that was less about a boycott or a travel advisory, but think about, how can I market this? Okay, how can I market this, and what tools can I use to market this so that people become aware? So what's my awareness strategy? Okay, what are my must air points as a part of this strategy? How long do I want to air it, and when do I want to change it? Okay, to give visibility. I mean, I had heard about this, but until I started looking at this and saw the topic, like I said, I don't think a lot of people are even aware of the fact that there is this travel advisory out there. So again, the question becomes, what's the effectiveness as it relates to this strategy? If we, the four of us, wanted to come up with a strategy to really get people's attention, I bet in 30 minutes we'd come up with a stronger strategy to keep people going there.
Maybe we should market our consulting.
Well, I also think about, we've talked about why this particular tactic, but then let's talk about the item, the issue, and figure out how do you bring change if this is your directive from your organization. How do you create the environment where change happens? And in my opinion, throwing, I guess the thing that's hot on my top of my mind is the importing of, or the free tickets to California that governor has given to their migrants that have come in, or and that our governor's response was to call them names. And I thought, we are living I mean, maybe this is all just a bunch of toddlers who are dressed up like grown-ups, because they're not really acting like grown-ups.
I've called it sandbox politics for a long time. There's a comment here from Martin to Catherine's point, and this is a previous point, so I'm not sure which one. It's not so much banging a gavel, a symbol of authority and legitimacy, but more akin to Khrushchev banging his shoe on the pulpit at the UN. And that's for those who aren't familiar. To the best of my knowledge, there have only been 2 military actions that were actually approved by the United Nations. One was the first Gulf War, and prior to that was Korea. And the only reason it happened in Korea is because Khrushchev had a temper tantrum and walked out, and therefore wasn't around to veto the action. So his dramatic expression of disdain actually facilitated the end that he was trying to stop.
So it's interesting because Catherine, you made the point about what it would lead to. Well, there was legislation in Missouri that came out, and it actually came out as Senate Bill 43 in Missouri. And that was the result of their travel advice, or at least I think the publicity from the travel advisory. I'm not sure that the travel advisory was X plus Y equals this. I just think publicity, and then all the other angst related to this situation at that time. But
a conversation starter.
Yeah, it's a conversation starter. So they got some legislation. So unless they think they're going to get some legislation in Florida, and I don't know what legislation they would expect. I mean, you could be against everything the governor's talked about, but there's only one way to make change in a democracy. And it happens every November. You got to put the right people up, and then second part of that is you got to get people to vote. And if you can't get more than 50% of the electorate to get out and vote on election day, how do you expect people to follow a travel advisory?
Apathy is rampant, and from my standpoint, I would say a lot of it is just complete frustration, and the feeling that you are yelling into a canyon that does not respond. But I guess I always just boil it down to the what is that, mano face to face, man to man, that is, what does that conversation look like, and how do we give ourselves the best opportunity of really having our voice heard? And in my opinion, when I do that, I try to think about, okay, if I were this other person and I felt strongly about this, how do I find middle ground? How do I become, an instrument of, because are we able to change someone else's mind? No, they have control of their own mind. So really the opportunity here is to begin a dialogue where I come with the expectation that I might learn something and they come with the expectation that they might learn something. And how do we get that? How do we move that forward when it's nowhere in our society right now? Do you see it anywhere? Because I haven't seen it anywhere.
Well, I think that there are platforms like this, and some are a much larger platform than we have right here.
Mhm.
It's still, the problem is that extremist rhetoric will always attract more attention than civil rhetoric. It's just not that, you're not going to get the masses to go watch a chess game the way they will go watch gladiatorial combat.
So, but if that's true, Giannis, so what are the ethics of that? So if you know that to be true, and you really believe in your message, do you have to go extreme because you know that nobody watches a chess match?
Well, that's really interesting. There's a freshman congressman from North Carolina, I believe. I think his name is Jeff Jackson. He's fascinating. He's got a growing TikTok following. And he's not talking politics per se. He's talking the mechanics of politics. He's describing what it's like to be part of the governmental system. He appears to be a moderate Democrat, and he's not engaging in any of the hyperbole or any of the stuff that we're so turned off by. And one of the things that he said in the video, he said, when you look at the prominent politicians who are frothing at the mouth, as soon as you turn the cameras off, they become nice, normal people.
Right. It's a show. Right.
And he said that his perception is that they're doing that because that's how they feel they need to act to get attention. And, on the one hand, it's comforting to know that it's an act. On the other hand, it's disappointing to think that they feel they have to act that way because nobody's interested in a civil, rational conversation.
I think it's the design of the legislature, though. As a congressperson, you really only have 1 year to get the attention, because your second year, suddenly you're running for re-election again and trying to get donations. Whereas in the Senate, you've got 6 years. So you don't necessarily have to be bombastic right away. You can learn and figure out the nuances of what it takes. I mean, to me, it would be very difficult to be a congressperson because literally you have a 2-year bite. You don't get it, you're gone. How am I going to get it? I'm going to be loud and I'm going to say outrageous things. And no matter what party you're for, if I'm loud and outrageous, I've got your attention and maybe I'll get another chance.
It seems like we don't really know how to fix this.
No, I would agree with that. I keep saying, when do we hit maximum capacity for outrageous? And it's kind of like when you have an issue that happens, something, and you go from 0 to crazy mad in 30 seconds. You got nowhere to come back to. How do you get calm in that situation without some kind of explosion?
Isn't part of that, though, a function, which is a bigger issue, of attention span, social media, et cetera? You go back 30, 40 years, Tip O'Neill and Reagan were on opposite ends, but they weren't throwing literal stuff at each other. They did their thing, but people would actually read through the point. They'd actually read an article. Like, here's a relic I have on my desk, an actual newspaper, an dinosaur that I read, versus most people are getting information. Where'd you get that? I read it. Where'd you read it? Online. From who? Oh, my
Twitter.
Like, so everyone's feed, which is an echo chamber, there's no authority of, wait, that was Walter Cronkite versus my drunk barber, right? Like, and it all permeates the brain.
Oh,
and
yeah.
doing their own research or critical thinking or formulating of an opinion.
Is that the way we're
Well,
teaching kids?
What's that?
Is that the way we're teaching kids now? I mean, because if you look at people that are younger than us, are we teaching them to take, I call them headliners, take snippets and then form an opinion from it, as opposed to actually doing it? I don't have any kids now to say or not, but I'm asking them a question. Is that how we're educating people to learn?
It's all short form and micro learning is the trend. They're calling it micro learning.
Okay.
Which-
Well,
Yeah.
and I also think that it is almost subliminal in that we've got small children on airplanes with an iPad, and in front of the TV at home. And, that is the babysitter. Their interaction, all information is coming through digital, means, FaceTime, even when they call grandma, it's like, so I look at this situation and I feel like it's a microcosm of what is happening in our world. And I don't know how we, come back from it. But I think your point, Peter, in that in history, now two things happened. You had delay from what happened to me knowing it in Fresno, California,
Yeah.
and there was also the reporter that relayed that information. I wasn't going to get video from the moment of, the act. I don't know how many of you have seen Biden fall at the Naval Academy, but I've seen it about 1 million times, every time you turn on something, and it's like, really? Is this news? I don't think so. I mean,
But even the feed though, so again, back to the Stone Ages when we were all kids, there was one screen in the house. It was in the living room, the television, and we all sat around to watch the same thing. And depending on your family, might have had a conversation around, wow, the space shuttle blew up today. That's pretty horrible. Oh yeah, what do you, right now it's like somebody's getting that information on TikTok. Somebody's other people don't even know. Oh, that happened a week later. So there is no conversation around the input from parents or families around the table, whatever. Everybody's getting their own feed.
and we're all drinking from a fire hose
Yeah.
in terms of the amount of information.
That's spewing Kool-Aid.
You both make valid points, and that is the fact that, Biden fell over some sandbags. And within the hour, you could have seen it 1,000 times. Jerry Ford tripped a couple of times, and you didn't hear about it till 6:30 at night. And you might have seen it once or twice, and then maybe Saturday Night Live did something about it. And that was it.
Well, I was actually thinking just that, Stuart, because, Gerald Ford was an All-American football player. He was probably the most athletic president we've ever had.
Right.
But between a couple of shots where he tripped and Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live, he had a national reputation as a bumbler and a klutz.
Yeah.
And that was before social media.
Right.
The Kennedy-Nixon debates, the average soundbite, I was told, was 60 seconds. The Bush-Dukakis debates, it was 9.8 seconds. And that was before social media.
Right.
So,
And our attention span is now down to like under 9 seconds.
yeah, they I heard that actually goldfish
Statistically.
have much longer attention spans than
Yeah,
we do. It's not
exactly.
just 9 seconds.
I have this working theory that I think is really missing in our educational system, and that is teaching critical thinking.
That's exactly where I was going.
And not not in junior high or high school. I'm thinking you can literally take critical thinking concepts and teach them to an elementary school person. They need to be able to think on their own and draw conclusions and do it in an unemotional fashion. I mean, we've discussed some pretty interesting things during the time we've been together. Nobody's lost their temper. Nobody's face got red. Nobody's fist hit the desk. We have to be able to communicate to those younger than us that you look at something and draw some conclusions, and it's okay to change your mind. You don't have to own your idea.
Yes.
It's okay to change your mind. In fact, I tell people all the time, change my mind, present me the facts, and I would love to say, thank you, that's new information for me.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you rather admit you're wrong so you can start being right than continue to be wrong?
But that's the opposite of the way the echo chamber works. We're all getting our feeds from wherever are getting our feeds from on the continuum, and not listening to an opposite opinion without
Design, exactly. Yeah.
Unless you're seeking it out.
Yeah.
you know, and it's funny.
It takes more
My
work to seek out.
That's,
to fight the
it gets harder to
Mhm.
find. But yeah,
Yeah.
Catherine.
exactly. My youngest son just graduated with a degree in philosophy,
Uh-oh.
and yeah, he has a job too.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
What's the starting salary for an entry-level philosopher today? You're good.
No, yeah, well, it's a starting, entry level job, but it's a company that he interned with for
Cool.
a year prior. And so he's really, excited. But my point is, I have 3 sons. My oldest is just graduated with his general degree. And then my middle is a comedian and a history major. And so, and I don't mean comedian like in the family, I mean stand-up comedian. So you got to watch out, because he will like, whatever you say is fair game. But my point being, there's a group family chat, and we're going back and forth. And my son, the comedian, says, "Mom, I'd watch how many of those you actually comment on Instagram, because it will end up being your feed." And, that's not a thing that I think of. My youngest says, "Well, you should go off all social media," which he has done.
Good. Now, that's
And,
impressive.
I,
Bravo.
but that is one thing I think that was part of our household growing up, was, and my growing up years too, was dialogue and discussion about things. And we did disagree, and we did have conversation where nobody ended up dead at the end, or bloody, or outcast from the family. And I think that doesn't happen. And that's, my point.
I still remember
you
after
have to be mindful
Trump was
about it.
elected, there were headlines about how families were not getting together for Thanksgiving
Yep.
because they simply could not sit down at the table with each other. And that's tragic.
Mhm.
The tragic part is because you don't really have to talk about it.
Well,
There's a-
that's one reason you don't have to talk about it.
Yes.
But the other reason
What is that? No religion, no politics, right?
Yeah. I want to wrap up, but Stuart, when you talk about critical thinking, I taught high school for 23 years, and that was always my major focus. More than imparting information, I wanted to get my students to think, and I still remember this so clearly, that I'd use Socratic method, and I tried to draw out the students to find their way to the answer. I had this one student; she was, this very attractive, very bright, straight A student. And at one point she just said in exasperation, "Why can't you just tell us the answer?" And I
That's the
remember
rub
that
right there.
I tried to explain it to her, and she just couldn't get it.
To me, that's the rub, because we teach people, at least traditionally, we dump a lot of stuff on their lap. They write it down, and then we expect them at some point in the future to regurgitate it, either through a test or a document that they have to write.
And to
Whereas-
give us the right answer.
Get
Yeah.
the right. Why not, to your point, Nelson, just, build a test where you can test their critical thinking skills based on the data that's presented to them.
Well, I love that, because when I was a kid, again, the Stone Ages, you got a math problem. They gave you the problem, you gave them the answer. Now it's show your work, but we're not asking for the equivalent of show your work on, write a history paper on your opinion of, well, here's why I came to this conclusion. Here's my opinion, right? But I think we need to show our work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I actually read about some teachers that were trying to think of innovative ways of using ChatGPT. One of which was, you're going to be graded on the sources that you plug into ChatGPT.
To show that you got the input to give it.
Yeah. So, there are ways of integrating the technology into our lives in a way that doesn't turn us into zombies. But it's a lot easier to be a zombie.
Yeah. It's less effort for sure. I don't know if easy is the right answer at the end of the
my
day.
theory on
Is it
why
easier?
zombie movies have become so popular, that we're it's just the way the culture's gone. All right, well, thank you all for a delightful conversation. Catherine Fitzgerald, Stuart Wiggins, Peter Winnick, delighted to have you back, and look forward to having you back again. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you would like us to take up, please go to jonasandgoldson.com, use the contact information, submit your suggestion if it's compelling, we'll definitely use it for a future episode. And until then, please continue grappling with the gray.